I've been collecting garden gnomes at a rate of 5 per year since 2014. There's just something about their twinkly eyes and pointy hats that makes me feel at peace. I've got Ziggy with his long white beard and noble bearing. The brothers Bodkin and Podkin in their matching tunics and curly-toed gnome shoes. Miss Dewdrop, the socialite of Gnome Society. And Blazeberry, resident gnome bad boy. All there to bravely guard my flower patch. There's just nothing like rolling with the gnomies. But the price of garden gnomes has skyrocketed in the last few years, and my wages just haven't kept up. That means that this year, I was only able to bring home Ziggy's half-brother, Sir Sparklebeard, his questionable second wife, Lady Sparklebeard, and their bouncing baby boy, the Baron Sparklebeard. Sparklebeard's mother, the Dowager Sparklebeard, and his little gnome dog Doodle, I'll just have to wait until next spring. Now, you might be wondering if I really need all these gnomes. And the answer is yes. Definitely yes. It breaks my heart that Dowager Sparklebeard and the good pooch Doodle are currently gnomeless. But the mismatch between rising prices and stagnant wages also affect what some might consider to be higher stakes situations, like whether or not someone can afford food or housing. But even though those higher prices mean I can't afford as many gnomes as I could yesteryear, they do mean more gnome profit for gnome makers, which means they'll produce even more gnomes. It's a gnome win scenario. In the long run, all this works out as the market slowly self-adjusts and supply and demand settle into a new equilibrium. But in the short run, we're stuck with more gnomes than ever and a whole bunch of gnome connoisseurs who can't afford to take them home. Hi, I'm Matt Sofa, and this is Study Hall, Macroeconomics. Let's start by making one thing clear. In economics, the long run and the short run aren't about a specific amount of time, like a month, a year, or even 10 years, but how long it takes variables like price, wages, and demand to respond to changes. In the long run, all these variables are like an Olympic gymnast. Really, really flexible. There's enough time for supply and demand, price and wage to balance out and return to equilibrium. This means it isn't really affected by a change in price. In the long run, those market forces will balance out any huge jump in gnome prices, so gnome production will hang out at whatever spot is sustainable for both gnome suppliers and gnome demanders. So when we talk about long-run aggregate supply, we're really talking about the steady rate of production that's sustainable for a whole economy, also known as potential GDP. But short-run aggregate supply is a different story. In the short run, other variables like wages don't have time to adjust to something like a bump in price. That means short-run aggregate supply really only responds to changes in price, since those other variables and forces haven't kicked in yet. And if a supplier can sell a product for more money, they're gonna supply even more too. That happens because in the short run, those other variables are a little less Simone Biles and a lot more like a concrete garden gnome, frozen in place. Also known as fixed, or like a jam-covered toddler, sticky. This is known as sticky wage theory, or nominal rigidity of wages. And it was developed by our macroeconomic homie, John Maynard Keynes, during the Great Depression. It happens because our wages are determined by a lot of other factors. This includes stuff like how long contract negotiations take, or the fact that raising the minimum wage requires Congress to actually pass a bill rather than arguing about dress codes, reading the phone book as part of a filibuster, or threatening to remove the Speaker of the House yet again. All this means that wages are not gonna automatically keep pace with the price of goods. So in the short run, the supply of something like garden gnomes will react quickly to a change in price. But my yearly gnome budget isn't gonna budge, throwing our economy all out of whack, at least for a little while. So let's say that thanks to inflation, Sir Sparklebeard and his family sell at $35 a pop, up from 30. Price has moved, but in the short run, everything else stays put, like the wages the company pays their gnome makers, or even the cost of some of the inputs of production. This is a great situation for firms. It costs them the same amount to keep their factories running, popping out gnomes left and right, but they can make $5 more in profit when each gnome sells. Basically, when those costs of labor and other resources are constant, there's a positive relationship between the selling price and the quantity of output supplied. The higher the price of a product, the more willing a firm is to produce it. This is true not only for the garden gnome market, but for all domestic products combined. That's why we call it aggregate. And like we already established, that means gnome makers and everyone else will start producing enough gnomes to take over every porch, yard, flower patch, and botanic garden in the land. Of course, the opposite happens with the much less common economic occurrence of deflation. When the price level falls, firms become less willing and able to produce, be it gnomes or otherwise, since they won't be able to sell at as high of a price. They can't make as much profit, but those wages they have to pay and other resource costs stay the same. So they have to cut back production to stay profitable. This leads to the ultimate tragedy, a decrease in gnome production, even if it is easier for me to afford my gnome habit. This might in turn lead to gnome factories laying off workers, shutting down factory locations, or cutting production hours. And this stuff is important for everyone, not just die-hard gnome heads like myself. It can take a while for our economic system to self-regulate, with the push-pull of supply and demand bringing prices down and wages up to a point of equilibrium. So when price increases, the whole economy is out of whack until those other variables can catch up. Because short-run aggregate supply is so sensitive to price, when we put it on our graph, we see that positive relationship in the upward slope of our short-run aggregate supply curve, the graphical representation of all this stuff we've been talking about. The higher the price they can sell for, the more output firms supply. Its upward slope looks a lot like any market supply curve. But while the short-run aggregate supply curve is always going to have a positive relationship with price, unlike Sir Sparklebeard, it's not stuck in place amongst my azaleas. Just like our regular supply curve, changes in the availability of resources like land, labor, or capital can all affect where it lands on the graph, shifting it left or right. If I were to say that the cement to produce our gnome friends is manufactured through a closely controlled chemical combination of calcium, silicon, aluminum, iron, and other ingredients, and that common materials used to manufacture cement include limestone, shells, and chalk or marl combined with shale, clay, slate, blast furnace slag, silica sand, and iron ore, I would be absolutely correct. Thank you, Portland Cement Association. So the prices of resources and inputs in production like calcium, aluminum, iron, shells, chalk, or marl, whatever that is, can change how many gnomes the company will produce. If marl costs more, the curve will shift to the left because it will be more expensive to make each gnome, even if that selling price remains high. If the price of marl decreases, we'll see the opposite, as it becomes even cheaper to make gnomes. The wages of the gnome makers are also going to factor into where our supply of curve falls. Remember that wages tend to be stickier than other inputs of production, so they change far more slowly. But when they do change, it shifts the aggregate supply curve. Like marl, labor is an important resource for gnome companies. And if it costs more to pay their workers, it will cost more to produce each gnome. And if it costs more, firms will choose to produce fewer gnomes, bird baths, or any other garden decor, or anything else, shifting the aggregate supply curve to the left. Alternatively, if we entered some dystopian nightmare where wages actually decreased, labor would cost less, so firms could hire more, and therefore supply more too. Of course, all those other things that change our long-run aggregate supply curve, like technology, can also shift the short-run aggregate supply curve. If cement technology were to advance, becoming faster and cheaper, then those gnomes could roll off the conveyor belts in even greater numbers at the exact same cost to their manufacturer. That means firms could make more profit, shifting the curve to the right without raising prices. But unlike Sir Sparklebeard and his family standing firm in my front yard, in the economy things are always changing. When firms produce so much more than consumers can buy, our whole economy veers off its potential GDP path. So something's gotta give. Eventually, wages will, theoretically, adjust, though many of us today are still looking at our paychecks praying they'll catch up to the sticker price of a new gnome. Or, eggs and milk and housing and stuff. Plus, if higher gnome prices mean the shelves of the garden supply store are stocked but shoppers can't afford to take them home, prices will eventually fall and supply will decrease slightly. And I'll be there, ready, waiting. It all comes back to the idea that in the long run, everything is flexible, from wages to price to supply. Thanks to market forces, even these stickier variables will eventually automatically adjust, and we'll get back to our nice, comfy, potential GDP. When the point finally comes, when I've gotten my raise and gnome prices have decreased slightly in response to lower demand, we'll have a new equilibrium, and I'll have a new gnome for my garden. Obviously, recognizing the intricacies and fluctuations of the garden gnome market is really important. But understanding short-run aggregate supply is important, even if you don't like garden gnomes. To which I say, how could you, you heartless heathen? It can give a big picture view of how the economy is doing, offering snapshots of production levels, pricing dynamics, and employment trends. Because when short-run aggregate supply is out of whack from the rest of the economy, a lot of gnomes end up sitting on the shelf instead of actually contributing to a country's GDP. And of course, when this happens with goods like food or housing, it means not only is our economy not at its best, but individual people can't afford necessities. In the US, as in many economies around the globe, we depend a lot on market forces to balance all this out in the long run. But that means in the short run, without government intervention, a lot of demanders are left high and dry, and the Dowager Sparklebeard might be left on the shelf. If you're enjoying this series and are interested in taking the full study hall macroeconomics course and earning college credit from ASU, check out gostudyhall.com or click on the button to learn more. And if you want to help us out, give this video a like, share your garden gnome collection in the comments, and smash that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. See you next time.